Imagine waking up not in your comfortable bed, but on a thin straw mattress in a cramped stone cell, with iron shackles around your ankles. The year is 73 BCE, and you are no longer free. You are now property of Marcus Lucius Crassus, one of Rome's wealthiest men, and your life expectancy has just dropped to less than 7 years. The salt mines, gladiator pits, and brutal plantation work await you. Your soft, modern hands have never held a pickaxe, your back has never bent under a Roman overseer's whip, and your mind has never grappled with the reality that you are now worth less than a good horse. This is why you wouldn't last a day as a Roman slave, and this is your story. The first thing that hits you isn't the cold stone floor beneath your bruised body, but the overwhelming stench of human misery mixed with urine and rotting straw. You've awakened in the slave quarters of a Roman latifundium, a massive agricultural estate stretching beyond the horizon. The darkness is absolute, except for thin slivers of grey dawn light creeping through gaps in the wooden door. Your fellow slaves, packed like cargo around you, begin stirring as the overseer's horn echoes across the compound. These aren't the dramatic Hollywood slaves you might imagine. They're gaunt, scarred individuals with hollow eyes that have seen too much. Their bodies tell stories of malnutrition, overwork, and casual violence. You try to sit up, but iron shackles around your ankles remind you of your new reality. The chain connecting your feet allows just enough movement to shuffle, not stride. Your clothes consist of a rough woolen tunic that scratches against skin not yet hardened by manual labor. The fabric is coarse, undyed, and already stained with sweat and dirt from the previous day's work you can't remember. Around you, experienced slaves are already moving with practiced efficiency, knowing that hesitation means punishment. The overseer enters without warning, his thick leather whip coiled at his belt like a sleeping serpent. Lucius Brutus is a freedman himself, a former slave who earned manumission through 20 years of faithful service and now manages his former master's human property with the zealousness of the converted. His face bears the ritual scars that mark him as once enslaved, but his eyes hold no sympathy for your situation. He orders in rapid Latin, expecting immediate compliance from bodies that have learned to move without thought. The other slaves scramble to their feet with mechanical precision, but you hesitate, still processing the nightmare you've awakened into. That hesitation costs you. Brutus's whip across your shoulder before you can react, the leather cutting through your thin tunic like it's made of papyrus. The pain is sharp, immediate, and unlike anything you've experienced. Not just physical agony, but the psychological shock of being struck like an animal. Modern humans aren't accustomed to sudden violence as a management technique. Your echoes off the stone walls, mixing with the of shackled feet, as the other slaves pretend not to notice your introduction to Roman discipline. Breakfast, you discover, is a concept that doesn't exist for Roman slaves. Instead, you receive a small portion of barley porridge mixed with water, served in a crude clay bowl that's been used by countless others before you. The porridge has the consistency of thin gruel and tastes like salted cardboard, with occasional crunchy bits that might be husks or might be insects. You're not sure which and increasingly don't care. Your modern palate, accustomed to flavored foods and variety, rebels against this monotonous sustenance designed purely to keep working bodies functional. The water comes from a communal well, and you watch other slaves drink deeply despite the cloudy appearance and metallic taste that suggests the water source is none too clean. Your 21st century sensibilities scream warnings about waterborne diseases, but dehydration is a more immediate threat than potential dysentery. Around you, slaves eat in silence, mechanically consuming their meager rations, with the efficiency of people who understand that this might be their only meal until sunset. The total caloric intake for the day will barely sustain basic bodily functions, let alone the manual labor that awaits. The walk to your work assignment reveals the true scale of your new world. The latifundium stretches endlessly across the Italian countryside, a patchwork of wheat fields, olive groves, and vineyards that represent more wealth than most Roman citizens will ever see. Your shackled feet struggle with the uneven dirt paths worn smooth by decades of slave traffic. The iron chains that connect your ankles have a rhythm all their own. Shuffling, Shuffle. Step. Shuffling. Step. A percussion section in the symphony of human bondage. Other work gangs pass you heading to different assignments. Some toward the olive presses, where they'll spend 14 hours crushing fruit. Others toward the vineyards, where they'll prune vines under the increasingly hot sun. You notice their postures. Shoulders permanently stooped, backs bent, feet moving with the mechanical precision of human machinery. These bodies have been shaped by their labor, literally molded by the demands of agricultural production. The thought occurs to you that within months, you'll look exactly like them, assuming you survive the adaptation period that kills roughly 30% of newly acquired slaves. Your assignment becomes clear as you approach the wheat fields. You'll be working with the harvest gang, cutting grain with a short-handled sickle that will force you to work in a perpetual crouch. The tool itself is deliberately designed to prevent slaves from standing upright, both for efficiency and to psychologically reinforce their subservience. The curved iron blade is sharp enough to slice through wheat stalks, but also sharp enough to open arteries, if handled carelessly by inexperienced hands. Around you, experienced slaves demonstrate the proper technique, a swift, low swing that cuts the grain close to the ground, while maintaining a rhythm that can be sustained for 12 hours. The overseer explains the quota system with bureaucratic precision. Each slave must harvest a specific amount of grain per day, measured in Roman bushels and calculated based on field conditions and individual physical capacity. Failure to meet quota results in reduced rations, additional work assignments, or physical punishment. Excellence beyond quota earns no rewards. It simply establishes a new, higher baseline for future expectations. The mathematical precision of this exploitation system reflects Rome's bureaucratic approach to human property management. The first hour of harvesting teaches you more about physical limitations than years of modern exercise ever could. Your back screams as you attempt to maintain the necessary crouch, muscles that have never performed this specific motion cramping with increasing intensity. The sickle feels impossibly heavy in hands accustomed to computer keyboards rather than iron tools. Each swing requires conscious effort and concentration, while the experienced slaves around you move with unconscious rhythm, their bodies having learned to conserve energy over years of identical motions. Sweat begins pouring down your face despite the morning coolness, and you realize you're already working at maximum capacity while barely keeping pace with the slowest members of the gang. Your modern cardiovascular fitness means nothing when applied to this specific type of sustained manual labor. The wheat stalks seem to multiply before your eyes, an endless golden sea that must be conquered one swing at a time. Meanwhile, the experienced slaves maintain steady conversation. While working, their breathing barely elevated by effort that has you gasping for air. The sun climbs higher, and you discover that Roman summers are significantly hotter than your climate-controlled modern environment prepared you for. Without sunscreen, hat, or protective clothing, your exposed skin begins burning almost immediately. The other slaves have developed protective tans over years of outdoor labor, but your soft modern complexion starts reddening within the first hour. The overseer makes note of your obvious discomfort, but offers no accommodation. Slaves are expected to adapt to working conditions, not the reverse. Dehydration becomes a real concern as sweat pours from your body faster than the small water rations can replace it. Roman slaves typically received about 3 cups of water per day, barely enough to sustain life under normal circumstances, let alone during intense physical labor in high temperatures. You watch experienced slaves conserve their movements, working steadily, but never wasting energy, their bodies having learned efficiency through necessity. Every motion you make is still clumsy, inefficient, burning through your limited energy reserves at an unsustainable rate. By mid-morning, blisters have formed on your palms where the wooden sickle handle rubs against soft skin. In the modern world, you would stop working, apply first aid, and allow healing time. Here, You wrap strips torn from your already ragged tunic around your hands and continue cutting grain. The makeshift bandages quickly soak through with blood and continue working, creating a grinding paste of cotton, plasma and dirt that makes each grip more painful than the last. The other slaves glance at your bleeding hands with a mixture of sympathy and resignation. They remember their first days, but they also know that showing weakness invites punishment not just for you, but potentially for the entire work gang, if the overseer decides that collective responsibility might motivate better performance. You begin to understand that Roman slavery operates on principles of mutual surveillance and group punishment, turning potential allies into unwilling enforcers of their own oppression. The quota system reveals its true cruelty as the morning progresses. You've harvested perhaps a quarter of what's expected, and the gap between your output and the minimum requirement grows larger with each passing hour. The overseer begins paying closer attention to your section of the field, making notes on his wax tablet that will determine your evening meal allocation. Other slaves start working slightly closer to your area, not to help directly, but to ensure that your shortfall doesn't reflect poorly on their own performance metrics. You realize that even if you worked at your current pace for 24 hours straight, you still wouldn't meet the daily quota. The system is designed around bodies that have been conditioned over months and years, with muscle memory and physical adaptations that simply don't exist in your modern frame. The mathematical reality becomes clear. You're facing a slow starvation as reduced rations weaken you further, creating a downward spiral that eliminates unproductive slaves through calculated neglect rather than obvious execution. Midday brings no respite, only intensified heat and the growing awareness that your water ration was exhausted hours ago. The sun beats down mercilessly as temperatures soar past anything comfortable, creating heat mirages that dance across the grain fields like mocking spirits. Your modern body, accustomed to air conditioning and unlimited hydration, begins shutting down non-essential functions to conserve resources. Dizziness comes in waves, and you find yourself swaying as you work, vision occasionally blurring at the edges. The experienced slaves recognize the signs of heat exhaustion, but can offer no help without risking their own safety. Roman law made aiding inefficient slaves a punishable offense, as it was considered interference with property management. You watch them work steadily through the blazing heat, their bodies having adapted over years to function under conditions that would hospitalize most modern people. Their movements remain economical and purposeful, while yours become increasingly erratic and desperate. The afternoon shift introduces new torments as your body rebels against continued abuse. Muscle cramps begin in your calves and spread upward, sharp spasms that double you over without warning. Modern humans rarely experience the sustained physical stress that causes these systemic breakdowns, and you have no context for managing the pain. Each cramp forces you to stop working, falling further behind quota, while the overseer's attention becomes increasingly focused on your deteriorating performance. Your breathing becomes labored and shallow, not from exertion alone, but from the beginning stages of heat stroke. The body's cooling system, overwhelmed by heat and dehydration, starts failing in predictable stages. First comes profuse sweating. Then as sweating stops as fluid reserves are exhausted, then core temperature begins rising toward dangerous levels. Roman slaves died regularly from heat-related illnesses, and their overseers viewed such deaths as acceptable losses in the cost of agricultural production. Late afternoon brings the overseer's final assessment of your productivity, and the mathematics are brutal. You've completed roughly 30% of the required quota, a shortfall that guarantees punishment under the estate's management system. Roman agricultural efficiency depended on precise calculations of labor input versus crop output, and slaves who couldn't meet minimum standards were quickly identified for corrective action. The overseer approaches with the casual indifference of someone solving a mathematical problem rather than dealing with human suffering. Your fellow slaves continue working with studied concentration, having learned that witnessing punishment too openly can result in their own punishment for showing solidarity with inefficient property. The social isolation is complete. You're surrounded by people who understand your situation perfectly, but cannot offer help without endangering themselves. This systematic destruction of human connection was a cornerstone of Roman slavery, preventing collective resistance by making survival an individual rather than group concern. The punishment for quota failure is swift and efficient. Reduced evening rations, an assignment to night work after the regular day shift ends. This creates a mathematical spiral where weakened slaves receive less food while expending more energy, ensuring that recovery becomes impossible. The overseer explains this with bureaucratic precision, noting that persistent quota failures result in reassignment to more hazardous work details, where survival rates drop significantly. You begin to understand that Roman slavery operated like a complex sorting machine, constantly evaluating human property and redistributing workers based on productivity metrics. The most capable slaves received better assignments and slightly better treatment, while those who couldn't adapt were systematically worked to death in mines, quarries, or galleys. The system was designed to extract maximum economic value from human bodies, while maintaining the illusion that survival depended on individual effort rather than systematic exploitation. Evening meal reveals the true cruelty of the reduced ration system. Your portion consists of a few spoonfuls of barley porridge mixed with water, perhaps 200 calories total, for a body that has expended over 3,000 calories in physical labor. The mathematical impossibility of survival becomes clear as you stare at the meager portion that must somehow fuel both recovery and tomorrow's labor. Around you, slaves who met their quotas receive slightly larger portions, but even their rations are insufficient by modern nutritional standards. The communal eating area buzzes with quiet conversation among the more experienced slaves. But you're excluded from these discussions by the unspoken rules governing slave hierarchy. New arrivals, especially those who perform poorly, exist in social isolation until they prove their ability to contribute to group survival. This systematic ostracism serves multiple purposes. It prevents inefficient slaves from learning survival techniques too quickly, and it creates incentives for rapid adaptation to working conditions. Night work assignment takes you to the olive presses, massive stone wheels that require human power to extract oil from crushed fruit. Your job involves pushing a wooden beam attached to the grinding wheel, walking in endless circles for 4-hour shifts while the wheel crushes olives into paste. The work is monotonous, physically demanding, and performed in near total darkness, with only oil lamps providing flickering illumination that creates dancing shadows on stone walls. The circular walking motion creates different muscle strains than daytime harvesting, affecting your legs and hips in new ways, while your upper body attempts to recover from the morning's abuse. Other slaves assigned to night duty move with mechanical precision, their bodies having learned to function on minimal rest, while performing multiple types of labor. You quickly discover that Roman slaves typically slept only 4 to 5 hours per night, with work assignments running nearly around the clock during harvest season. Midnight approaches as your body reaches complete physical breakdown. The combination of heat exhaustion, dehydration, malnutrition, and continuous labor over 18 hours pushes your modern physiology beyond its adaptive limits. Muscle fibers begin literally breaking down as your body cannibalizes protein to maintain basic functions, a process that creates toxins requiring kidney function you can no longer support with your dehydration level. The other night shift slaves notice your deteriorating condition, but follow the established protocol, continue working, unless someone actually collapses, at which point they'll call the overseer to remove the body. Roman agricultural operations built slave mortality into their economic models, with replacement costs calculated as a normal business expense. Your individual survival or death affects the overall operation about as much as the failure of a single piece of equipment, noted, calculated, and replaced if necessary. Around 2 a.m., your body finally surrenders to the accumulated damage. It starts with muscle cramps so severe that you double over, unable to maintain the circular walking motion that keeps the olive press functioning. The cramps spread systematically through your legs, abdomen, and back as dehydrated muscles contract without the minerals necessary for normal function. You collapse beside the grinding wheel, no longer able to push the wooden beam that has become as heavy as a fallen tree. The overseer arrives within minutes, having been summoned by the sudden stop in olive press operation. He examines you with the clinical detachment of someone evaluating damaged equipment, checking for signs of heat stroke, exhaustion, or illness that might be contagious to other slaves. Roman agricultural manuals contain detailed instructions for assessing whether collapsed slaves were worth medical intervention or should be left to die as an economic loss. Medical care for slaves consisted primarily of determining whether treatment costs exceeded replacement costs. The overseer's examination reveals symptoms of severe dehydration, heat exhaustion, malnutrition, and physical breakdown that would require weeks of recovery time, an economic impossibility for agricultural property expected to generate immediate returns. Roman medical texts recommended that slaves showing signs of systematic physical failure be sold to gladiator schools, mines, or other operations where short-term intensive labor could extract remaining value before inevitable death. You're dragged to the medical area, a small room containing basic supplies, and a freedman with rudimentary training in treating work-related injuries. He provides a small amount of water and examines your condition with the efficient assessment of someone who processes dozens of similar cases each month. The diagnosis is straightforward. Your modern body lacks the physical adaptations necessary for Roman agricultural labor, and the gap cannot be closed quickly enough to justify continued investment. Dawn arrives as you lie in the medical area, technically still alive but effectively finished as productive agricultural property. Your body has entered the early stages of multiple organ failure brought on by dehydration, heat stroke, and physical trauma that exceeded your adaptive capacity. Modern emergency medicine could reverse these conditions with IV fluids, electrolyte replacement, and controlled cooling. But Roman medical practice focused on economics rather than recovery. The estate manager arrives to inspect the night's casualties and make decisions about resource allocation. You're one of 3 slaves who collapsed during the overnight shift, joining the daily statistics that Roman agricultural operations tracked as carefully as grain yields and livestock mortality. The manager examines each case quickly, sorting human property into categories: treatable, questionable, and terminal. You fall clearly into the terminal category, representing a total loss of purchase price, plus 1 day's labor investment. The decision regarding your fate reflects the brutal economics of Roman slavery. You'll be sold immediately to whoever will accept damaged property at reduced prices. Gladiator schools sometimes purchased dying slaves for training purposes, allowing new fighters to practice killing techniques on humans who were expected to die anyway. Stone quarries and mines also bought terminal cases, extracting final value through extremely hazardous work that killed quickly but generated some economic return. This systematic disposal of human beings who couldn't adapt to working conditions was built into Roman agricultural planning. Estate managers maintained relationships with various industries that specialized in extracting final value from worn-out slaves, creating efficient markets for human disposal. Your case represents nothing unusual, simply a normal business transaction involving property that failed to meet performance expectations. Your transportation to the gladiator school reveals the interconnected nature of Roman slavery industries. The cart carrying you also holds 2 other failed agricultural slaves and 1 household servant who developed a chronic illness, all being delivered to the same destination for final processing. The gladiator school purchaser examines the merchandise with professional detachment, calculating how many training sessions each body might survive before expiring. Roman gladiator schools served multiple functions beyond entertainment. They disposed of unwanted slaves, provided combat training for military recruits, and created spectacles that reinforced social hierarchies. Your unconscious body will serve as a practice target for new gladiators learning weapon techniques allowing them to experience the psychological reality of killing humans before entering the arena. The school operator expects you to die within hours, but even unconscious victims serve training purposes. The gladiator training compound represents the final stage of Roman slave processing, where human bodies that couldn't meet agricultural productivity standards are consumed in teaching violence to those deemed more valuable. Your unconscious form is dragged into a practice arena where new gladiators will learn sword techniques by cutting into flesh that still contains enough life to bleed properly, but not enough to fight back. The trainers explain that practicing on dying slaves serves important psychological purposes. It accustoms new fighters to the sight, sound, and smell of human death, while providing realistic training conditions impossible to achieve with wooden dummies or animal carcasses. Your role in this educational process reflects the Roman view that slaves existed primarily to serve civic functions, including the preparation of citizens for military service through realistic combat training. The first training session begins with basic sword work as new gladiators practice cutting techniques on your unresponsive body. Roman gladiator training emphasized precision and efficiency in killing, skills that required practice on human targets to develop properly. The instructor demonstrates proper blade angles and cutting depths while explaining how different wounds affect an opponent's ability to continue fighting. Your modern nervous system, already compromised by organ failure, responds minimally to the training cuts, providing realistic feedback for the gladiators without the complications of active resistance. The session focuses on educational value rather than entertainment, with students learning anatomy, wound patterns, and combat psychology through hands-on experience with human targets who pose no threat of retaliation. Advanced combat training introduces more sophisticated killing techniques as the gladiator students progress beyond basic cutting exercises. The instructor uses your failing body to demonstrate proper spear thrusts, explaining how to penetrate vital organs efficiently while maintaining weapon control for immediate withdrawal and follow-up attacks. Roman military doctrine emphasized quick, clean kills that minimized exposure to counterattacks. Your unconscious state provides ideal conditions for teaching complex combat maneuvers that would be difficult to practice on active opponents or artificial targets. The students learn precise techniques for severing major blood vessels, piercing lung tissue, and delivering instantly fatal wounds to the heart and brain. Each technique is practiced multiple times to develop muscle memory and confidence in combat situations. The final training session focuses on psychological conditioning as new gladiators learn to manage the emotional responses associated with killing humans in combat. The instructor uses your dying body to teach students how to deliver fatal wounds without hesitation while maintaining tactical awareness of surrounding threats. Roman gladiator training emphasized mental preparation as much as physical technique. Your breathing becomes increasingly shallow and irregular as multiple training wounds compound the existing organ failure, creating the realistic death process that serves important educational purposes for combat students. They observe the actual progression from consciousness through unconsciousness to death, learning to recognize when opponents are truly neutralized versus merely wounded, but still dangerous. Death arrives quietly in the gladiator training arena as your modern body finally succumbs to the accumulated trauma of attempting to survive as a Roman slave. The trainers note the time of death for record-keeping purposes and begin preparing your body for disposal, while discussing the educational value provided during your brief service as training equipment. Roman gladiator schools maintain detailed records of practice sessions and training materials consumed. Your death represents a completely normal outcome in the Roman system of human property management. Modern estimates suggest that newly captured slaves had less than a 50% survival rate during their first year, with most deaths occurring within the first month, as soft civilian bodies encountered working conditions designed around lifetime agricultural laborers. Your case study illustrates why modern humans wouldn't survive the transition to Roman slavery. Your story illustrates the mathematical impossibility of modern human survival in Roman slave conditions. Contemporary people lack the physical adaptations that developed over generations of manual agricultural labor: thickened skin resistant to sun damage, cardiovascular systems adapted to sustained physical work, digestive systems capable of extracting nutrition from minimal food supplies, and psychological frameworks for processing continuous physical and emotional trauma. Roman slavery operated as an efficient sorting mechanism that quickly identified individuals capable of productive labor while eliminating those whose bodies couldn't adapt to working conditions. The system maintained detailed statistics on survival rates, productivity metrics, and cost-benefit analyses of different slave categories. Your failure to adapt represents nothing personal, simply the predictable result of placing modern physiology in ancient working conditions. The economic impact of your failure ripples through the Roman agricultural system as estate managers adjust their purchasing strategies based on actual versus projected slave productivity. Your case contributes to data suggesting that certain body types and backgrounds produce poor returns on investment, leading to more selective acquisition practices and refined training programs designed to improve adaptation rates. Roman agricultural economics operated on thin profit margins that required precise calculations of labor costs versus crop yields. Individual slave failures like yours were factored into broader financial models that determined pricing for agricultural products, land values, and investment returns. Your death becomes a small but measurable component in the complex mathematical systems that sustained Roman economic expansion. Training programs at Roman gladiator schools incorporate lessons learned from cases like yours, developing more efficient methods for extracting educational value from failed slaves while maximizing the realism of combat preparation. Your body's responses to different weapon techniques provide data for improving training curricula and better preparing gladiators for actual arena combat. Roman military doctrine benefited from gladiator training programs that used realistic human targets to teach soldiers essential combat skills. Your contribution to this educational process, while involuntary, served the broader Roman strategic goal of maintaining military superiority through superior training methods that provided soldiers with actual experience in human combat before facing enemy forces. Archaeological evidence from Roman agricultural sites reveals the systematic nature of slave mortality through discoveries of mass burial sites containing remains of individuals who died from overwork, malnutrition, and workplace injuries. Your theoretical remains would join thousands of similar cases, documented by modern researchers studying the human cost of Roman agricultural efficiency. Contemporary forensic analysis of Roman slave burials shows evidence of chronic malnutrition, repetitive stress injuries, and trauma patterns consistent with sustained physical abuse. These findings provide scientific confirmation of historical accounts describing the brutal working conditions that killed the majority of newly captured slaves within their first year of agricultural service. Modern medical analysis of Roman working conditions confirms that contemporary humans would face immediate life-threatening challenges when subjected to ancient labor demands. Current cardiovascular fitness standards, nutritional requirements, and injury recovery times are incompatible with the sustained physical stress that Roman slaves endured daily. Your case study represents predictable medical outcomes rather than individual weakness. Sports medicine research demonstrates that even elite modern athletes would struggle to meet Roman slave productivity quotas, while surviving on the minimal food and water rations provided to agricultural workers. The combination of extreme caloric deficit, dehydration, heat exposure, and continuous physical stress creates physiological conditions that rapidly lead to organ failure in bodies accustomed to modern living standards. Historical comparison reveals that Roman slave mortality rates exceeded those of modern prisoners in maximum security facilities, combat soldiers in active war zones, or workers in the most dangerous contemporary industries. The systematic nature of Roman human exploitation created working conditions more lethal than most modern humans can imagine, designed around the assumption that slave bodies were disposable resources rather than individuals requiring basic survival support. Economic historians calculate that Roman agricultural operations achieved profitability partly through externalizing the true costs of human labor by working people to death, rather than providing sustainable working conditions. Modern businesses operating under similar principles would face immediate shutdown for safety violations, criminal prosecution for negligent homicide, and massive liability for workplace deaths. Cultural analysis of Roman slavery reveals sophisticated ideological systems that justified treating humans as disposable agricultural equipment. Roman legal codes, philosophical texts, and religious practices all reinforced the concept that certain people existed primarily to serve economic functions, with individual survival or death being less important than overall system efficiency. Modern psychological research on dehumanization demonstrates how Roman society maintained these beliefs through cultural practices that systematically reduce slaves to economic units rather than individuals. Your case study illustrates how these ideological systems translated into working conditions designed to extract maximum value from human bodies, while minimizing investment in their maintenance or survival. Educational institutions studying Roman history use cases like yours to demonstrate the practical implications of historical economic systems that modern students often encounter only as abstract concepts. Your story provides concrete illustration of how seemingly distant historical practices translated into immediate physical consequences for millions of individuals. Contemporary slavery research draws connections between Roman practices and modern human trafficking, forced labor, and exploitative working conditions that continue affecting millions of people worldwide. Your case study serves educational purposes by making historical exploitation patterns visible and understandable to modern audiences who might otherwise view ancient slavery as fundamentally different from contemporary forms. Research methodologies and historical recreation involve careful analysis of ancient working conditions, nutritional standards, and mortality data to understand why modern humans would struggle to survive systems that millions of ancient people endured for generations. Your theoretical case provides data points for understanding the specific adaptations required for survival under Roman labor conditions. Scientific approaches to historical analysis reveal that ancient peoples developed physical and psychological adaptations over multiple generations that prepared them for working conditions that would quickly kill contemporary humans. These adaptations included different nutritional efficiency, pain tolerance, cardiovascular capacity, and psychological frameworks for processing continuous trauma. Fascinating, isn't it? Legal analysis of Roman property law reveals sophisticated systems for managing human ownership that treated slave deaths as routine business losses rather than significant events. Legal codes specified procedures for disposing of dead slaves, calculating replacement costs, and managing estate operations when human property failed to meet productivity expectations. Thoughtful. Contemporary legal scholars studying Roman slavery law note parallels with modern corporate practices that externalize human costs while maximizing profit extraction. Your case illustrates how legal systems can create frameworks that make systematic human exploitation appear rational and economically justified, rather than morally problematic. Anthropological studies of Roman society reveal cultural practices that normalized extreme levels of human suffering while maintaining social stability for the free population. Religious festivals, public entertainments, and educational systems all incorporated elements that reinforced the acceptability of treating certain humans as expendable resources. Cross-cultural research demonstrates that societies can maintain complex moral systems that include sophisticated ethical principles for some members while simultaneously permitting systematic brutalization of others. Your case study provides illustration of how these cultural systems operated in practice and created conditions where individual deaths became statistically insignificant. Economic modeling of Roman agricultural systems reveals precise calculations that balanced slave acquisition costs against expected productivity and survival rates. Estate managers maintained detailed records that treated human deaths as predictable business expenses, similar to equipment depreciation or livestock mortality in modern farming operations. Financial analysis of Roman agricultural profitability shows that the system achieved high returns partly through treating human beings as consumable resources rather than capital investments requiring maintenance. Your death represents a calculated loss that was factored into profit margins and investment strategies from the initial purchase decision. Medical history research reveals that Roman-era physicians developed specialized knowledge for treating work-related injuries and illnesses in slaves. But their primary focus remained on cost-effective triage rather than comprehensive healing. Medical texts contain detailed instructions for determining whether slave treatment costs exceeded replacement expenses. Ancient medical practice documents show sophisticated understanding of trauma treatment, nutritional deficiency diseases, and heat-related illnesses, but treatment recommendations consistently prioritized economic considerations over patient recovery. Your case would have represented a routine medical decision based on financial rather than humanitarian factors. Archaeological excavations at Roman agricultural sites reveal infrastructure designed around systematic processing of human bodies for maximum economic extraction. Living quarters, work facilities, and disposal systems all reflect engineering approaches that prioritized efficiency over human welfare or survival. Material culture evidence shows that Roman estates invested heavily in equipment and facilities, while providing minimal infrastructure for slave welfare, creating physical environments designed to extract maximum labor while minimizing support costs. Your theoretical experience reflects architectural and engineering decisions that prioritize productivity over human survival. Comparative historical analysis reveals that Roman slavery systems achieved economic efficiency levels that surpassed most subsequent forms of forced labor through sophisticated management techniques that maximized human exploitation while minimizing support costs. Modern forced labor systems rarely achieve the systematic efficiency that characterized Roman agricultural operations. International research on forced labor demonstrates that Roman techniques for managing human property established patterns that influenced subsequent exploitation systems throughout history. Your case study provides baseline data for understanding how systematic dehumanization translates into specific survival challenges for individuals subjected to exploitative working conditions. Contemporary anti-trafficking organizations study Roman slavery systems to understand techniques that modern exploiters use to control and manage victims of forced labor. Roman methods for breaking individual will, preventing collective resistance, and maximizing productivity from unwilling workers provide insight into current exploitation practices. Modern slavery research reveals that Roman techniques for psychological control, social isolation, and systematic dehumanization continue appearing in contemporary trafficking operations. Your case study illustrates baseline patterns that help modern investigators identify and understand current forced labor situations. Educational programs designed to prevent modern slavery use historical case studies like yours to demonstrate the practical consequences of systematic dehumanization and exploitation. Understanding Roman slavery helps contemporary audiences recognize warning signs and patterns that indicate when social systems are developing exploitative characteristics. Prevention education emphasizes that systematic human exploitation requires cultural, legal, and economic systems that make individual suffering appear acceptable or invisible. Your story illustrates how these systems operate in practice and provides concrete examples of why protective institutions and human rights frameworks require active maintenance. Your story concludes as a reminder that the physical and psychological adaptations required for survival under Roman slavery conditions developed over generations and cannot be quickly acquired by individuals accustomed to modern living standards. The systematic nature of Roman human exploitation created working conditions that efficiently sorted human bodies based on their ability to sustain extreme physical stress while surviving on minimal resources. The mathematical precision with which Roman agricultural systems extracted value from human bodies reflects sophisticated understanding of biological limits and economic optimization that modern analysts recognize as exceptionally efficient for its historical period. Your failure to adapt represents predictable outcomes rather than personal weakness, illustrating why contemporary humans would struggle to survive systems that ancient peoples endured through generational adaptation. Modern research confirms that Roman slavery created working conditions more systematically lethal than most contemporary audiences realize. Designed around economic principles that treated human death as acceptable business costs rather than moral problems requiring solution. Understanding these historical patterns provides insight into both past and present forms of systematic human exploitation. As we close this difficult journey through ancient Rome, let your breathing slow and your mind drift away from these harsh realities of the distant past. The stone floors grow softer beneath you, the iron shackles fade like morning mist, and the blazing Mediterranean sun dims to gentle twilight. You are no longer in that world of systematic exploitation and human suffering, but safely return to your own time, your own bed, your own freedom to rest without fear. The Roman Empire fell long ago, its brutal systems crumbling into historical dust. The estates where slaves toiled under merciless overseers now lie beneath Italian vineyards, where free workers tend grapes in reasonable shifts. The olive presses that ground human bodies alongside fruit have become archaeological curiosities, their stone wheels silent and still. The gladiator schools, where the dying served as training tools, are now tourist attractions where guides speak in hushed, respectful tones. Modern laws protect workers, medical care preserves life, and human dignity stands as a recognized principle rather than an impossible dream. The systematic dehumanization that made your hypothetical suffering possible has been replaced by institutions, however imperfect, that recognize the inherent worth of every individual. Sleep now in the knowledge that centuries of moral progress separate you from those dark, ancient practices. Let the weight of history settle gently around you like a protective blanket. Understanding the past helps us value the present, appreciate the freedoms we possess, and remain vigilant against the return of systems that treat human beings as disposable resources. Rest peacefully, knowing that your comfortable bed, clean water, adequate food, and basic human rights represent victories won through centuries of struggle against exploitation. Close your eyes and drift into dreams, where ancient sorrows transform into modern hopes, where historical darkness gives way to contemporary light, and where the long arc of human progress bends toward justice, dignity, and peace.